Hello, everyone. Today, I'm just thrilled to have with me David Douglas, and David was the director of the school for quite a number of years. So many of you will know David in that context. I'm personally appreciative of David. He was actually the director of the school when I was hired, so I have you to thank for that, David. And not only that, though, but of course the leadership for many years, the moral compass that you brought to the school. It's just been great to work with you over the years. So I'll just start by asking, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Wayne. Keeping well, busy, and pursuing quite a number of things of interest, and happy with a healthy and diverse family. So all's well.
Well, that's great. Well, it's been funny times we've been living through these last couple of years with COVID, and thankfully we can go back in time and talk about things prior to COVID. So maybe just starting by your background, what brought you to the school, and some of your early recollections.
Okay, well, my entry to the school was a mixture of chance and, I suppose, good luck. At that time, I was in management consulting. I was with the province of Ontario for about 4 years in regional development planning and related fields. And then I went into management consulting in 1974, which was then Woods Gordon. They now became Ernst & Young and a variety of other organizations. So I became a partner in Woods Gordon, and I sort of started the particular practice that I was pursuing in community development, economic development, and related fields. Started that for Western Canada and parts of Northern Canada, but based in Edmonton. So I spent about 10 years with that organization, and then set up my own practice, but remaining in the West, based in Edmonton. And I think it was Harry Cummings reminded me about, because Harry had just joined the firm. I brought Harry and a couple of other colleagues into the firm, and we were busy together on a variety of things. And Harry had moved to the school, University of Guelph, and he reminded me about a notice that was circulated about a replacement director for this graduate school called the University School of Rural Planning and Development, USRP&D. And I saw it in the Canadian Institute of Planners postings and materials, and I looked at it and I said, that's interesting, but that's academic, and so I'm not going there. I'll be doing other things, all related to consulting. And I think Harry reminded me and said, look, this is a graduate school, and you do management consulting, you have managed a practice, you're used to working with people who are doing research and communicating and working with people. You might call them clients, we might call them colleagues and or collaborating communities, but there's great overlap here. Why don't you think about it? So I did, so I thought about it, and I put in an application. I was really quite lukewarm about the whole venture, but I said, well, I'd have a look at this. And I met Howard Clark, then Vice President Academic, and he persuaded me to think about it further. And then, having put in a formal application, I was invited to Guelph to meet members of faculty in the school and some other people. And I think George Penfold picked me up from one of the local hotels and then brought me over to this strange, weird, and wonderful organization, and then wheeled me around, meeting all sorts of people: Don Reed, John Fitzsimons, John Fitzgibbons, Jackie Wolf, as Jackie was then, and a number of other people. So that was essentially it. So I treated it very much as an opportunity for a discussion. And I felt very, very comfortable because all of my colleagues to be really did the same. I didn't feel that I was interviewed or that I was grilled or examined, but I felt that it was a very interesting discussion on areas of common interest. Mm-hmm. That really reinforced my growing interest. And very shortly after that, I was offered the position as professor and director, and I joined. I think I visited the school something like May, June of 1985, and arrived in September with family and dog.
I'm just thinking that your background in practice must have, I mean, I can see how you would start to feel pretty comfortable pretty quickly, because it's, you know, the school's not a traditional academic institute or department in the sense of all of the things that we do in terms of practice.
Yes, yes. And that attracted me, I must say, in retrospect. A, it was not a standard department or college or whatever. It was a different organization, and I was used to being in quite different organizations, even in government. In government, I was with the then Ministry of Treasury, Economics, and Intergovernmental Affairs, a very strange octopus organization. And we essentially ran the budget, but we also ran regional development and new town planning and a widespread, you know, regional level community consultation and a whole series of other things. So we were a sort of a lateral organization as much as we were sort of a vertical organization. And the school, I suppose, in retrospect, was now another version of that. Vertical in having fairly unique relationships with senior management university, but lateral in the sense that the modus operandi was collaborative and cooperative, and we were designed to work with any and other academic entity within the university and beyond. So that was suitably atypical for me.
So any particular memories from those early years, all the way from, you know, what the facilities might have been like? By then we'd had several cohorts of students graduate.
Yes.
Early reflections on the day-to-day life within the school, I suppose, some of the challenges, or maybe even some of the fun things that you might recall.
Yes. Oh, many things, because we were a different organization. There was always pressure, as one vice president said to us, to regularize us. So there was always this tension and pressure to make us a little more normal, a little more average, a little more predictable. And that was a sort of a creative tension in a way in the school's life within the university. And I certainly felt that and lived that in a way. So what struck me about the school initially was it was a very, very active professional academic unit. It was, the students were giddy, they were active, they were talking about things, they were buzzing around. They'd run in and out of your office, you know, with the drop of a hat. So it was a minimum of formality. There was a great deal of fluidity within the relationships and the day-to-day activities in the organization, among faculty and among students, and indeed among some of our outreach collaborators, people from the community, from rural organizations and so on. So that openness in the organization really struck me, and I found that very, very comfortable. And students were very comfortable, and I was very comfortable with not calling me Professor Douglas. In fact, I was rarely called Professor Douglas. The international students would call me Professor David for some reason or other, which was very enjoyable. The rest of them would call me whatever they wanted to call me. And I found that very, very comfortable.
Yeah. Just as an example, I can remember when I started with the school, if I remember correctly, you had a major project that you were leading on community futures training materials. Am I remembering?
That's right. Yes.
I remember how engaged that project was as an example, and that would have been in the early 90s.
That's right. I think that was, well, that maybe late 90s, might be 1999, 2001, 2003, something like that. But yes, that was a major project. That was a $1 million contract by another name. And we engaged some 30 people on that project. And that in a way combined many of the typical elements and activities of the school, because we essentially engaged in outreach right across the country to a multiplicity of communities that were engaged in that very active and still going Community Futures program. And it was community development based in its aspirations. And we involved through the school, through the university, through collaborating universities, we involved some 30 colleagues. So it was a large project, and it was Canada-wide, went on for about 3 or 4 years, and we produced an enormous amount of material. And that material fed into community development, particularly community-based economic development practice, but also fed into our courses, into student research, and so on. So yeah, that was a major project. Yeah.
Anything else from the early days you'd like to reflect on before I move on to another stream of questions?
Well, I found again, getting back to the school's innovative construction as a university-based school, not a line department or college, that inevitably influenced certainly my agenda. So one of the first things that I did was to visit most academic units in the university. So I went around, I spoke to deans in biological sciences and veterinary medicine and in arts and literature and music. And I talked rural planning and development to them. And I made the connections as best I could. And I found most of my colleagues to be very receptive. That rural literature, rural folklore, rural physical sciences, soils, microclimate, animals, animal welfare, that we could easily connect these to rural planning and development. That was the openness of our field, the eclectic nature of the field. So I always remember pursuing those initiatives. And another major thing that we undertook as a school, and I refer to it as the sort of, the appropriation of our program, because we were set up with the collaboration and the input from a variety of academic departments, like geography, like economics, like what was then called, I think it was called land resource science.
Oh, yes,
I think it was called in those days. So there was a variety of collaborators that set up the school in July 1980. But our program was essentially populated by their courses and many of their perspectives. So it was in some respects, a multidisciplinary program, but strangely enough, planning in terms of practice and planning in terms of theory and concepts and development in terms of theory and concepts was not in the center. So through the Board of Graduate Studies, we engaged in extensive collaborations and arm twisting and a variety of other things to move into the center of our program our mission in rural planning and development. So we put the RPD in the center of our program rather than having it in the periphery. And then we put the more traditional academic disciplines, rural sociology, rural geography, rural economics, if I can call it that, or spatial economics, and so on. We put them as, if you wish, as layers around the center rather than being in the center themselves. But that took considerable effort and it led to a reorientation of the school's program. But we did achieve that. And I think that's remained in place.
It just speaks to universities as an institution in some ways, doesn't it? I mean, for folks from the outside, and I mean, thinking of alumni, former students and the like, may not always appreciate the nature of universities and how, in terms of how they operate. It's kind of funny that they actually do operate, but they tend to operate pretty well. But there's a whole process and set of procedures that are somewhat different than much of what occurs in the business world and elsewhere, for example.
Indeed. Yes. My final recollection, Wayne, but it's a recollection that I would take not just in the early days, but throughout the whole piece, is the debt I owe and the respect that I have, not just for faculty, colleagues, and the rural communities and organizations we work with, but also for the students. We've been blessed, certainly in my tenure, blessed with a wonderful variety of rich, intelligent, active, and committed students. And that, so when people ask me about, do you miss the daily life of being in the university and on campus and so on, the answer is no, not particularly. I'm very busy with other, if related, activities in community development and otherwise. But I do miss the stimulus and the cut and thrust of the graduate students, and they are much valued in my recollection and my perception of my life and times there.
Yeah, for me, it's interesting to reflect on the nature, and the question is the student body that comes to our program or to other planning programs, is it different than may exist elsewhere in society? And I've actually come to the conclusion it is a little bit, because I think folks who have planning and community and development in mind actually want to do good in society, want to do well by the world. And I just think that it influences the kind of folks that pursue this as a career.
Yes, that's right. It reinforces certainly the ethos that I found. And I forget which one of our planning theoreticians, Wayne, would remind us of this. I think it was Charles Hoch, as an H-O-C-H. I think he said it. Planners essentially want to do good and get it right.
Yeah.
That's as succinct, I suppose, a compression of what we try to do. And I remember discussing this at length with George Penfold and others. Yeah, we do have a commitment to do something good in the world we live in. And we go to school in a way, and we go into practice, not just to do good, but to get it right.
So using that as a stepping off point, then, what have we got right with RPD, or what has the contributions been of RPD over the last 40 years?
Yeah. Well, I think we've helped, I don't know how many students at this stage, Wayne, you might have a better sense, but we've helped a multiplicity of students through the cohorts since the middle of 1980. We've helped them, I hope, and I believe, to develop themselves as people, as very active and self-conscious people in the world in which they inhabit, as constructive people, as people who will bring about change, who facilitate change, facilitate development, and hopefully betterment. So I think in growing those cohorts of students, that maybe is our best and most lasting contribution. I think that's really the main piece, and hopefully through them, we have done some good. We've brought some good to the world and some betterment to the human journey. I think our other contributions have been perhaps less evident and maybe less important, but our academic and intellectual and our technological and methodological contributions, I think they've been important. I can think of a number of them. We've certainly added to the piece, but they advance, if you wish, the intellectual project, which is very important for humanity as a whole. But in a way, I suppose they're secondary to the enhancement of people's lives and daily living, their safety, their security, their livelihood choices, and so on. But I think we've made contributions there. I'd be a little less sanguine, perhaps, and a little less impressed with myself and with ourselves on the intellectual mission. never been quite convinced that we've added as much as we could have and we should have. So I think I'm a known critic there, and I remain critical of myself and critical of ourselves, of not moving the, if you wish, the intellectual project as far as we might have.
Yeah, it's all about balance at times, though, too, isn't it? I mean, it's I think that if I look over the years, the contributions that faculty have made through teaching and student outreach and things of that nature, you know, that gets balanced with the academic journey in terms of writing and further research as well, which is part of what we strive for, and yet it remains a challenge, doesn't it? So, so if we were to jump forward to the next 40 years, then what do you think are some of the challenges, the obstacles that we might face in the profession within the field of rural planning? However you want to wherever you want to take that question, I'll leave that with you.
Oh, it's varied. In some respects, there's the existential challenge, which I think we've been slow to internalize and then externalize. All of us know, Rachel Carson. All of us know Leopold and the County Almanac, 1949. So we're better dipped than most in the existentialist issue of there being one Earth, there's one planet, and we have custodial tenure, perhaps at best. But the overarching issue that we now typify as the climate crisis and climate change, that's perhaps is the big piece. That's the wraparound piece, and that will challenge faculty and students and our rural collaborators, colleagues and collaborators, very significantly. So I think that has become a centerpiece. It should have been much more of a centerpiece way back when I was, working on a daily basis with communities and community development organizations and planning organizations and so on. I should have been much more aware. We should have been much more aware and much more active in moving this ahead. We use terms like conservation and appropriate land use and, conscientious water resources management and all of those things. But we knew, in our inner thoughts, in a way, we knew better that, as Boulding and as all sorts of other people had told us, we are on planet Earth, which we've only one Earth, but we're living a lifestyle that demands 3 Earths. So our colleague Bill Rees and others was telling us this 30 years ago. So I think that's a fundamental challenge. In and around that, I think there are greater opportunities now for the interdisciplinarity that we aspire to. So I think the disciplinary boundaries are a little more porous, and there's greater ease of discussion across many disciplinary boundaries than perhaps in our earlier days anyway. So the priesthood of economics has been challenged, and I think, and it's been breached. It's still there, but I think it's been breached. And we see, senior public economists and economic intellectuals, if you wish, in the public realm and elsewhere, now happily speaking across anthropological boundaries, geographical boundaries, other boundaries into other fields of disciplines that were once the preserves of those in the disciplines. So I think there are growing opportunities in this transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary milieu that were less evident in our time. I think issues around, we've made progress, issues around gender and social justice. I think significant changes have been achieved and are continuing to be achieved there. So I think there's growing opportunities across those earlier boundaries and limits. And the same might be said of our relationships with our Indigenous brothers and sisters. We're learning that most of us are settlers of one sort or another. We're less afraid, perhaps, to address many sensitive issues that were beyond our knowing or beyond our willingness to consider them. So I think that's a significant advancement. So when we talk about development, I think Canada is undergoing a process of societal and social development, socio-political development, that poses a great number of opportunities for people in our general field, especially as it relates to indigenous peoples. And I find those exciting, and I find them promising and exciting and transformative. And I think of the sort of clarion call by one of the public intellectuals whose name I forget now, John Ralston Saul, about the fairer land or the fair country. And he called on us to remember that this is well ahead of the term, we're all treaty people. He was saying that over 10 years ago, that in the earlier days of settlement, there were very close integration and comfortable communications and cross-fertilizations in every respect among Europeans and First Nations. Mm. And somewhere around the early part of the 19th century, a divide was constructed between the domineering and dominating Judeo-Christian European and the then identified Indian or other. And that was made up. That didn't happen in the 1750s and the 1770s, and the 1780s and so on. The mix was actually happening. The cross-fertilization was happening. And then somehow or other, through the introduction of the Orange Order and other European transshipments, we created this divide, and then we institutionalized it, and then we exploited it. Mm. Now we have an opportunity to go back and, in a way, recreate the intermingling and the cross-fertilizations of peoples and civilizations. And that, from my perspective, is an enormous and an exciting opportunity. And I think the students to be, or the current cohorts of students, will develop in that shifting milieu. And I think it's intellectually and morally and otherwise a very exciting and very promising milieu.
In some ways, it takes reflecting these kinds of issues all the way from climate change through to dealing with Indigenous issues and so on. It makes me wonder, how does the profession need to change over the next 40 years?
In some respects, perhaps we need to deprofessionalize, as Mr. Foucault might say. Let's dump the sanctity of our profession and the walls and other things it builds around us. If it helps us build protocols for how we behave, that's fine. But let's not assume that in the profession we create our own priesthood and our own monopoly or oligopoly of know-how and privileged technique and privileged bodies of knowledge. So if we see our profession as one that grows outward, spreads out, and even thins out, so that in some respects, in practice and in our daily lives, the professional skin becomes so porous, it's actually not evident, then I think we will have achieved more than we've left behind. So in some respects, I would de-emphasize the professional dimension of our practice and emphasize the collaborative, cooperative, modest dimension of our practice. Yeah. So it's not a question of devaluing professionalism, but I think I would try and subsume its importance in the modalities of better practice.
I'm not sure if this captures it, but going through my mind as you're speaking is this debate that's occurred throughout my career, whether it's the planner as expert or the planner as facilitator, right? And I don't know the degree to which your comments would take you there, but at least that resonates for me that way.
Yes, I think our facilitation, our co-construction, our co-educating skills, but also our disposition, Wayne. I think it's very much in personal disposition. Because your personal disposition will leave you open to acquiring skills and to learning from others. Whereas our professional guidelines, practice, dance steps, if you wish, can create a hardness or an edge to how we engage in social learning and other learning episodes. So in some respects, I'd cultivate a disposition first.
So if you were to take some of these thoughts and translate them into a message for incoming students, what would that message be?
Spend a lot of time arguing. Yes, be prepared and be happy in the cut and thrust of debate. And I'd say that to faculty as well. We should see ourselves as students. And if we see ourselves as students, then we'd spend more time arguing and openly and unapologetically challenging each other, which we don't do enough of. And in my daily experience, we didn't do enough of because we were a little too brittle, a little too protective perhaps, and maybe not confident enough to be comfortable in really vigorous argumentation in the positive sense. That is part of our planning theory, the argumentative, if you wish, or the argumentative turn. You should be more comfortable in that. And I would encourage students to be questioning, to be interrogating. We use that term in planning quite comfortably. We interrogate concepts, we interrogate assumptions, we interrogate fixed positions, we interrogate those things which are unsaid, the unsaid dimensions of the planning episode. We need to be more comfortable in openly and collegially interrogating everything. Everything's up for grabs.
Your observation for sure, and at the community level, of course, as well.
Yes.
So if as we sort of move towards the end or the latter part of our discussion, folks will be probably interested in what you're doing now, and also to provide an opportunity for you. What would you like to say to former students?
Well, first of all, former students, because they are first, I would say thank you. In my Gaelic, I would say Gura Mahagat, Gura Mila Mahagat, because they enriched my life beyond description. I love them as colleagues. I ran into the office. I didn't walk in. I ran into the office. I remember telling some students that I did the 4 kilometer plus walk from our house in King Street to my office in 28 minutes. Not all of them believed that, but at least they heard that. And I did that because I was anxious to get there. And I would tell people this, that I sort of ran to work on Monday mornings, having done much work through the weekend, because as we were saying earlier, Wayne, you and I and others thoroughly enjoyed what we did, what we were doing,
Indeed.
and so on. So I actually ran to work, and then I took work home with me. And in large part, I did that because of the exhilaration and the excitement and the challenges that students posed. So I am forever thankful and grateful to the students that I had the privilege of working with through those years and afterwards. So that's my message to them. What am I doing nowadays? I'm doing community development. Surprise. I'm working in a rural community in Eastern Ontario because they're dealing with supportive housing. They're dealing with homelessness, surprise, surprise, and they're dealing with intergovernmental governance issues, relation to who does what, who makes locational decisions. So I'm in the thick of that. In Guelph, I'm in the thick of the Baker District redevelopment.
Yeah.
I'm in the thick of bridge renewal for the McDonnell Bridge. I'm writing about that, and I'm getting involved in the environmental assessment around that. I'm involved in the Guelph Green New Deal. I'm involved in climate change and trying to move our municipality to go beyond the rhetoric and go beyond buying 5 electric buses to doing something that's relevant and meaningful for the health of this community. I'm also continue to be involved with SURF and NAF, the North Atlantic Forum, and I'm involved in one student's PhD committee. I'm doing some scribbling, we can call my writing scribbling, and I am involved in a variety of other things, Wayne.
I hope
So,
you sound incredibly busy. I hope you're able to find a little time for yourself as well.
myself is in all of this, Wayne. So
Yeah.
this is all happily selfish and very fulfilling. So I mix this with gardening, golf, tennis, wonderful times with my wife and family, plenty of walking, not so much travel now, not too much travel nowadays, but hopefully some more, and a variety of other things. So
That sounds like a full agenda for sure. Anything else you'd like to offer as we wrap up our discussion, David?
well, thanks for this opportunity, Wayne. I think it was a very good idea, very good way to celebrate the 40th, our collective 40th. And nothing else other than to wish all of my colleagues well, and all of the rural communities that I had the joy and privilege of working with. I wish them good health, well-being, and the best of days. And I wish our former students and the current students the very best of peace and good health and fulfillment.
That's a lovely message to leave us with, and I just want to say thanks to you for your time today, for the time for the interview. But much more important than that is your leadership you provided here in the school for many years, and continue to provide that leadership. And I've always, I always thought in the back of my mind, David is our moral compass, right? He brings that strong ethics and values to things that influences everything that I think we've done here, and certainly many students over a generation or more to date. So thank you very kindly, David, for all of that. And just great to talk.
And to you, Wayne.
All the best.
Keep in touch.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.